Welcome once again to the dangerously disorganized reloading table of doom. I'm going to make a batch of shotgun shells with my Reload All 2, but I'm taking this opportunity to record a brief tutorial video of a typical powder measure. This is an RCBS Uniflow, which I got several years ago in a clearance bin at a gun store. They're still making this, more or less. Some engineering changes since then. They retail for $70 or even $80 brand new. This one was maybe $20. I don't know if you can do that good at a gun show, but you can do a lot better than retail. It's very simple to operate. This one is missing the reservoir cap, but I have found that the reversed lid from an empty powder jug, Hogden or Winchester particularly, will fit very nicely. You have the handle and the volume knob and the locking ring. Now the base of the powder measure uses the same thread as a die, so you can mount it directly into your press or use some kind of adapter that would take a die. This flat bar I found for a couple bucks at another gun show. And then I made various wooden things to clamp it in place over whichever press I happen to be using it. I remember a scene from Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, which is the absolute high-water mark of all Trek ever. It's the scene where they were trying to input the access code to Reliant's computer to tell the ship to put its shields down, and Saavik didn't understand what they were doing. So Kirk says to Saavik, you have to understand why things work on a starship. And that really stuck with me. You have to understand what's happening inside the tools you use, which very much includes your firearm. That's another reason I posted that slow motion video of my Remington Model 11 recently. In a powder measure like this, there's this nicely machined cylinder here, and it has a cavity in it. And that cavity, oh, that's going way out of focus, never mind. Anyhow, the internal volume of that cavity determines how much powder is being thrown. And this adjustment thing here, you screw that in and out and it changes the internal volume. And then you lock it in place with the locking ring, rather like a die. So on the upstroke with the handle, powder falls into that cavity, and on the downstroke it's swiped off to a uniform volume every time, because the cast iron thing here is also very finely machined to closely match that cylinder, and then it gets dumped down the spout. That's the basic principle of operation of these modern powder measures. Now there are markings on this shaft here, and they're somewhat arbitrary, really. I think they're just meant for you to make your own chart. You see I've got little circles here with a reference line slashed through them to indicate which way the flat of the shaft with the markings on it is pointing, and then what number is exposed by the locking ring. There may or may not be charts for any of this. The Lee Perfect powder measure, a plastic powder measure, they might have a chart, I don't know. I had one once. I was disappointed with its accuracy compared to the RCBS here, so I stopped using it. But through trial and error, you can quickly make your own chart of your favorite loads and just keep it. You're going to end up with a few favorite loads. You don't need to set the thing up all over again every single time. You can quickly spin this out or in to your desired load. That's about it, really, except one final note. Not every powder will flow through these measures smoothly. That's what they say when you see in the forums or the email lists. They say a particular powder meters well. What this means is some powders will flow more smoothly through the powder measure, others will bind and shear. Stick powders particularly For example, IMR 4064, IMR 4095, H4895. These are the traditional stick powders for rifle loads, particularly 30-06 and the M1 Garand. They have the correct burn rate for the Garand's gas system. I stopped using those powders because they were constantly binding and shearing in the measure. One stick would get caught in that interface between the edge of the cavity and the edge of the housing. And if you force it, it'll theoretically chop that stick in half, which won't do any real harm. I mean, half a stick will burn just as well as a full stick, but it could very well throw your weight off, especially if you're jiggling the thing and trying to get it to go through. You might settle the powder in that adjusted cavity and have an out of standard weight being thrown. That was just too much trouble for me, so I switched to a ball powder, Ogden BLC2, my favorite rifle powder, and it flows really, really well in every powder measure I've tried it in. I also use Winchester 231, a flattened ball powder. It looks like a flake powder in the... Where did I put that? Lee Auto Disc, which, as you can see, I've also marked with settings for the disc cavities. Now these are fixed cavities, and you have to struggle here, pull this out and rotate it to the correct cavity. Ow. Now for the shotgun loads, I'm going to be using Unique, which is an actual flake powder. And it flows well enough, but what I've discovered I have to do is I raise the cylinder to get the quantity of powder into that adjusted cavity, then I lower the cylinder to dump that powder into the empty shotgun hull I'm using. But I also have to thump the side of the powder measure to get that flake powder to settle, because sometimes it will log jam inside the powder measure and your next charge will be very badly overweight, which will cause various problems. These are things to be aware of when you're selecting powders and when you're selecting a powder measure. I hope that helps. Any questions, please leave them in comments as usual.